Welcome to Destination Linux. This is a podcast made up of four of the greatest minds ever to discuss our passion for Linux. My name's Noah, and with me are the three overlords of the file system ZFS mastery. The first up is Michael. Hey, welcome to the program, fellow Butterfs hater. How you doing?
Don't put me in that position.
Oh.
I don't have a preference either way, but I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm good. Ryan?
I'm doing awesome. Going? Oh, my Butterfs was working perfectly. I can roll it back anytime I want.
And Zeb is on holiday this week, so we won't go about the process of asking him how he is. But Michael, I guess tell me what you've been up to in the land of Linux this week.
Well, I've been doing a lot of stuff as far as building. I actually released a new video on the Tux Digital. I know, right?
Is this the one from 2 years ago that you were planning on doing that finally got around to? Or?
No, it was like 6 months ago, but still.
Oh, okay.
It's better than you thought. Still not that great. But it's happening. I'm doing more things. And also, we're actually going to test a new audio. So with the Destination Linux podcast, let us know what you think about this, the difference of the audio of this one. Hopefully, the recordings are properly going to work. So maybe the audio isn't new, and I'll make an edit and let you know in the video version if it's new or not. And just let us know how it works. I think it's going to be working great, and I hope it does. So there you go.
What was your new video on?
Oh, it was a pronunciation of how to say Sousa.
Nice. How do you say Sousa? Oh, wait, I'll go watch the video. My bad.
Exactly. You need to go to the video. But it's also, to be clear, my videos, my series about how to pronounce is not just the pronunciation of the show, or what? The pronunciation of the project. It's also a brief history and like an origin of those things as well. So like I talked about when SOSA was created as a company, what the acronym originally meant, and when they dropped using an acronym and just made it a brand, and that kind of thing. Right. So, and also like every time I do an episode on that series, it's like a brief history on top of the origin or the actual pronunciation. So it's not just a 5-second pronunciation video.
If people want to view that video and check it out, where can they go?
tuxdigital.com/YouTube or just tuxdigital.com because it's posted there too.
Sweet. Ryan, what exciting things have you gotten yourself into this week?
Well, I was mostly gone away in Florida this week on a business trip.
Did you clear that with me?
No, I didn't. You should have come along. We had a really good time with the team there and did a lot of codeathons with my local team and projects and things like that. But I think the most exciting thing for you would be this phone right here, because you have talked in the past about Blackberries and asking whether they are actually more secure, as they claim, than your standard Android device. So I think we all fall along the lines, just to be clear, that a Lineage OS or an E or something like that is going to be, in the current state of things, your most secure option if you could root your device and do that type of setup. But not all devices support that, and some people want something that is a little more newer in the hardware side. So in any case, I've been trying out this BlackBerry with the DTEC, and DTEC is basically their overlay on top of the Android store, the Google system of things, to create a better security platform for app permissions, security levels, encryption by default across the device, factory reset, and remote management of the device. One of the cool things is, one of the weaknesses I've always felt when you compare Android to iOS specifically is app permissions. While Android has gotten better, iOS has always had a more in-depth permission system in the fact that even if you turn off certain permissions, they won't allow an app not to run if you turn off those permissions. Now, sometimes the app won't work because if you have a camera and you don't give it camera permissions, well, it's just still going to open the app, but you won't see anything. But Apple allows that, whereas a lot of times in Android, if you turn off any of the permissions it requests, the whole app won't work, and the designers make it that way. This allows you that kind of Apple iOS experience within this tool. You have fine-tuned controls of what every application is doing, how much data it's sending, and where that data is going, and what permissions it's used, and when it's used those permissions, which is fascinating because all the things people want to see, like if I'm leaving my phone idle, is Google still pinging back to its servers, and how much data is it sending, and how many times does it ping back, is actually all captured within the DTEC system. So, and then you also have fine-tuned controls to turn that stuff off to keep it from doing that. So I'm really impressed with it so far. I need to spend some more time with it. But interesting, I would say BlackBerry's claim of being one of the most secure devices is certainly holding true when I've compared it to anything like the Samsung S8s and others that I've had before this phone. So I'm very interested to continue using it. And it has a physical keyboard, which is amazing to have back.
So here's the first thing that comes to mind. I'm wondering, do you sit up at night with like a notepad and you document like all of the ways that you're going to excuse Apple and iPhones, or does it come naturally to you like on the fly?
Well, what I like to do first is say, Ryan, we need to get the message out there that every OS is secure, perfectly private, and amazing. Right. And that's what I go out to do. I write it in simple note and I repeat it to myself in a mirror and then go and preach it out here on Destination Linux.
That's good. That's a good way to get in that's a good way to get in the groove. I like that.
I prefer to use Google Keep. That way you have everything in the Google Cloud, of course.
You need everything
smart.
in the Google
Another great option as well. The Drive client works very well for Linux. I'm glad. Hey, Michael, what do we have coming up in email this week?
So this week, we actually have a couple emails. We got 2 short emails. But first of all, we got an email asking us to shout out a Linux Fest that's happening in Kansas. So the email says, I was hoping your next show, you might briefly mention Kansas Linux Fest. It's happening on August 9th and 11th on the Wichita State University campus. You can go to kansaslinuxfest.org to find out more. And also, if you're in the area, you can. It's a free conference. If you just go to it, you can just walk in. There's no general admission fee or anything like that. So that's awesome. And I'm as many fests. If you have a fest, if you are anywhere, and like I don't know if it's like wherever it is, it doesn't matter. Just as long as it's a Linux Fest, let us know. We'll try to shout it out on the show.
Make sure to include the mandatory donation to @KernelLinux on PayPal of $1,500.
Right,
wow.
PayPal.me/
Is that to get you to show up. You're like that's a Kardashian.
No, that's an extra $2,500. No, it's $1,500 is the fee for us to read it on the air. You didn't know?
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
The second email we received is from a younger listener, which is really cool. And he says, "I'm a big fan of yours, and I believe one of the few Linux enthusiasts who's only a preteen. And I use Pure Arch and DDE. I think that means Deepen DE. I'm not sure. On a modded Dell Inspiron laptop. I installed Arch myself. I'm very passionate about Linux and its community, which my siblings don't understand. I just wanted to say, hey, love your podcast, and it's not just adults who listen and you love and use Linux, and that is awesome. Like, because I've had conversations with people who use Linux, but I've never talked to someone who's like 12 or younger about it, who's passionate about it. So that's awesome to see.
Actually, we have, because when we went to Linux Fest, there were a couple of kids who wanted to meet Noah, which I was like,
blew some of them off.
Please don't do that. Please don't go meet Noah. But then they wanted to meet, some of them wanted to meet us. Most of them wanted to meet Noah, but some of them wanted to meet us.
I don't think I was around that, actually, unfortunately. I think I was working on my talk that took me forever to do.
You were not around against your will.
Well, they wanted to meet me. And no, but they did. And Noah, you lie. You're trying to play a character here, because as soon as those kids came up to you, you were so passionate about, tell me how you use Linux. What do you use about Linux? Like, Noah becomes super animated, which the kids loved, and it's awesome to see how many parents are getting their kids into Linux at a young age.
Oh yeah, that's definitely awesome. And unfortunately I wasn't there because I did not have my talks prepared beforehand. And
right, that's what you're doing.
Yeah,
that's shocking, so, Michael. We're all shocked.
Next year, I'm going to be prepared.
Thank you to Grayson for writing into us, and I love that you use Arch as well. So you went for the full Linux experience there, deep into the Linux experience. Let me rephrase that, and I think that's awesome.
Deep in to the Linux experience.
Oh, look at that! I got a pun in. Yeah. So we want to hear from you, our listeners. Send in your favorite software or tip and trick of the week. We'd love to know what tools make your Linux experience amazing. Is there perhaps a specific Linux topic you would like us to try and cover? We would love to hear from you. Send your email to comments@destinationlinux.org.
This episode of Destination Linux is brought to you by DigitalOcean. Now, DigitalOcean offers the simplest, most developer-friendly cloud platform. It's optimized to make managing and scaling apps easy with their intuitive API, multiple storage options, integrated firewalls, load balancers, everything you could want out of a VPS provider, and then some. They're going to give it to you to try for free for a couple of months. Now, you can get this plus access to their world-class customer support for as low as $5 per month. As Ryan would say, that's darn near free. Or you could use their flexible pricing structure as low as 0.7 cents per hour. That is what we call darn near free. It's actually a fraction of darn near free. DigitalOcean has 2,000 cloud-agnostic tutorials to help you stay up to date with their latest open source software, language, and frameworks. That means that everything you learn on DigitalOcean, hey, it applies everywhere because they're invested in the community. It's not specific to their service. So you can get started on DigitalOcean. You can get 1 month for free with a $50 credit. Now, they don't do this for anybody else. For the 1 free month credit by going to do.co/DL. That's do.co/DL. Again, you can get started on DigitalOcean with that $50 credit by going to do.co/DL. Using that URL lets them know that you heard about it here on Destination Linux. And a huge thank you to DigitalOcean for sponsoring this episode of Destination Linux.
Yeah. All right. So up first in the news is something that, Noah, I think you're going to be really interested in, because I know you have mentioned multiple times your interest into getting into VR and building a machine specifically for VR.
Literally have the parts sitting right over there.
That's awesome. So the Linux desktop has gone VR, which this is incredible. So virtual reality is not just for gamers. A lot of people think this is just a gaming thing. We know not everybody's into gaming, but many are actually dreaming of bringing full immersion of VR to their desktop workflow. We've seen this in science fiction movies in the past, and generally when you see it there, eventually sometime in the future, some iteration similar will appear, and this is kind of the first iteration of this. So Linux isn't going to be a late adopter in this field, thanks again to Valve, who is backing XR Desktop, which is making this idea of a virtual Linux desktop a reality. So Collabora's XR Desktop is bringing full support for GNOME and KDE environments. And it's just, to me, if you look at some of the videos out there, the future of this just looks absolutely gorgeous. So this supports both the HTC Vive and the new Valve Index. Users will be able to grab, push, pull, scale, and pin windows. So this is not like the iterations that you see in Microsoft Windows, who also has a VR desktop. The way that one works is when you get into the VR mode, you're like in a room and there is a literal monitor, virtual monitor screen there, and you interact with it from that. The way this one works is when you get into the environment, you see your desktop and you can grab windows and push them, move them around, open applications. You see the full desktop, not a virtual computer desk or a virtual monitor.
Yeah, that seems way more interesting than just seeing a virtual monitor. That's the exact same experience, but you're virtually experiencing that exact same experience.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. And this is a community effort all the way, like most things within Linux. You've got Vulkan, Collabora in there. You have the Linux kernel development team who are working on building this support in. And, you know, of course, you have Valve providing funding to support this. And if you think about it, there's not a whole lot of gain for Valve other than their push for Linux to have this, because this isn't a gaming thing. This isn't something you go out and buy. I guess the push is because Valve has wanted Linux to take off so bad in the past. And I think we have some articles too that cover kind of some of the history of Valve and how hard that Gabe Newell and others have tried to push the Linux desktop as kind of the main operating system out there for Steam. But obviously there's a ton of work coming from a bunch of different communities. The idea of being able to interact with your computer through the virtual world. Noah, I think you've used virtual reality more than any of us. What are your thoughts on this?
I think it changes the paradigm of how we look at VR. Up until now, we've looked at VR as basically an entertainment thing. And I think what this does is it shifts the paradigm. So we're no longer talking about entertainment. Now we're talking about productivity. And the nice thing about productivity is it means that it has a wider range of use. It also means that there are people with bigger budgets that are going to be able to contribute to projects like this, because now you're talking about the lawyer who wants to have a very interactive teleconference meeting with, and I'm just making this up, a fake jury that they've assembled to see how they're going to respond in in a client case, right? And they have the budget to buy 12 of these things and say, hey, let's just set the thing up and let's create a VR workspace and send these out to do a mock trial or whatever. Like, you start to get into the telemedicine applications and stuff with VR. I mean, the ramifications, the implications for this, to me, seem like they're huge.
Yeah, absolutely. When you think about science fiction, I think the one that comes to a lot of people's mind is that Minority Report, where they're pushing, pulling the screens around. Yeah. And we kind of looked at that and thought, wow, that would be amazing to be able to interact with your machine that way. But earlier when we were talking about the show, we had all of these new windows. I was talking about tiling again, and imagine being able to push and pull windows with the full view in virtual reality. Because once you put that immersion in, it's like watching a 150-inch screen almost. No, I mean, you can kind of speak to that. Like if you put a movie on or something like that in virtual reality, it encompasses your full range of vision. So imagine how many things you could have up and be working on and moving around at the same time in a VR world. Now, of course, this isn't quite there yet fully. They're working on this, but if you look at some of the screenshots, I mean, it looks pretty close to what we've all imagined what VR could be capable of in a desktop environment.
They also have some videos that are demonstrating how you like grab the windows and move them around and like change in V space and everything. Like it's pretty cool.
So I'm pretty excited about this. And Noah, we're going to have to get this hooked up on your computer as soon as you get it ready to see some implementations of it. What's neat is when you hook up your VR, you can also record it through OBS. And while people won't be able to see the full immersion of the VR, they will be able to see what you're seeing in a one-dimensional or two-dimensional view and of the pushing, pulling, and how you're interacting with the environment. But I think that would be a really cool video to kind of see how you can interact with the Linux desktop.
Here's a question for you. Do you think that this will be more inviting to people that ordinarily don't have an interest in VR? Like, let's say somebody said, like, I'm just not a gamer. Like, not me, but somebody else out there saying to themselves, I am not a gamer. I don't have any interest in VR or gaming. Does this change that spectrum at all?
I think it would. I think because it changes that they could do things that are not necessarily restricted in the sense that they are told this is what it's for, and it allows them to, because it's a desktop, they could essentially do anything with it, and it allows them to figure out a way to do, like, one of the things I would love for it is to have a virtual reality editing of a video, because I wouldn't be so limited in how big the window or the preview window is, and I wouldn't be able to limit how big the timeline is, because I'm not restricted by the actual physical size of the monitor. Like, that would be awesome. So, and I could like pick and choose, like I can move the timeline out into another position, and like it'd be like, and I just move my head to control like where I'm looking at, and that sounds like an awesome thing to do in just that one instance. And I think that there'd be a lot of people who, if you presented it to them in that way, they would be much more interested in it rather than like for gaming in general.
Well, think about the industries that have adopted this. When you look at surgeries, right? When you're doing surgeries where they're remote locations, where the surgeon can actually have a more immersed view into what they're working on versus staring at a monitor screen, a flat monitor screen. You have just so many professions, people who typically may not be interested in gaming, but industries that could be utilizing this to interact differently with their profession. So yeah, I think this is going to bring a whole level of new people into the VR experience, because it's expensive. It's not really expensive for what it is, but it's still an expensive cost on top of a computer. So there has to be things, I think, outside of the enthusiasts who use it for gaming to really capture a wider audience. And that's what this is doing here. And I love that Linux is ahead, at least in the moment, of Windows in this regard, because the Windows implementation of it just isn't anywhere near what this current Linux model is.
Yeah, and it's also like beta or alpha or whatever.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that you not only have a ton of collaboration from the community, but you have a big entity, Valve, backing it financially to support making it happen. And that always helps to compete against these other competitors who have just endless amounts of money to throw at projects out there. So
it also makes it possible for someone to make a custom interface file manager where when you open it, you go, this is a Unix system. I know this.
Do you think that Valve had to have put their stamp on approval for this to take off? Do you think anybody else could? Like, I was thinking about our discussion last week and the revelation of the HTC Vive and stuff like that. Does Valve kind of have to put their stamp of approval on Linux VR for it to be successful?
I don't think so. I think that, if you had another big company in there, like a IBM, Red Hat situation come in, or somebody with deep pockets, they could. But honestly, a lot of industries spin off of things like gaming. So when you look at, for instance, the incredible power of GPUs and things, a lot of people tend to think that all of that is for gamers. But the reality is there's so many professional applications that have spawned off of that for video rendering, professional video animations, all of that also utilize that same power of it. So I think that it's a natural fit for Steam because the first implementation of VR was really thought about as a gaming experience, at least the first ones that took off or were backed by big companies. So I think Valve was a natural fit for it. I am still fascinated, to be honest with you, that Valve is so vested in the Linux. Now, obviously, they're not the only ones here. They're just financially backing. You've got an amazing community of Vulkan, Collabora, all these volunteers and everything making the product, but they just seem so involved in the right areas of pushing the Linux desktop forward, where I see in the past a lot of different companies seem to be pushing for the Linux desktop, but now it almost seems like most of them are just focusing their attention on the cloud, whereas Valve is still here at the desktop space. And I think they realize there's a lot of money and benefit to them to make the Linux desktop continue to survive and grow, whereas a lot of the other big companies seem to be solely sold on the idea that this is a cloud operating system.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point, and I think that Valve is one of those companies where you don't necessarily need them to be backing the infrastructure or backing this concept, but the fact that they are is like a monumentally good thing for this particular thing. So like in terms of like anytime people think that Valve is like slowing down in their support of Linux, they always come out with something that's like ridiculously pop as far as like attention and like no, you think that we don't care as much. Like, for example, when the Steam machines didn't take off that people were expecting them to or whatever, and people were like, well, maybe that's because Valve doesn't seem to, and then they released Proton, and then now they're releasing like a VR thing that they're working with. And they announced, like, this actually kind of makes sense. Like a few weeks ago, or like a couple months ago or something, I forgot when, but Valve announced that they were going to be working on, helping contribute to the development of KWin. And I think this is kind of like one of those things is how they were doing it, is because they were, looking into the future of doing VR on the desktop. And this is awesome. Like, there's so much potential to this. And it's kind of funny because people were like annoyed that Valve is, does proprietary software, and they are like a proprietary client and all that, but at the same time they're doing so much for the desktop, and they're doing it in an open source way that I don't mind. Like they're doing so much.
It's a situation where I think Steam's trying to get Linux to take off. They're trying to really push that as a desktop, and even their founder, who is a mega billionaire at this point, has come out with quotes directly stating he wants to push Linux forward. I think at a certain point, we've seen companies do this before. They get so involved in Linux, and then they slowly start adapting towards that open source. Yes. So instead of beating them up and saying, oh my gosh, you're not open source, and while they're doing all these donations, while they're pushing this, I think we let the natural order of things happen. We, of course, nicely encourage, hey, I'd love to see Steam go open source. I'd love to see them move away from proprietary, but thank you for everything you're doing right now. And I think the natural progression is Valve will get there. I really do, if they can get the Linux desktop to take off. And I think there are very few players in the Linux world now, big players, that are pushing the Linux desktop heavily. I think, like I said, they're all mostly focused on what they view as the big money maker, which is the cloud. But I think lots of money could be made on a Linux desktop.
Oh, yeah.
I think a lot of people can be employed by focusing on the Linux desktop. Nobody's really found the exact formula they need to utilize to do that, because you can't just start charging $90 for licensing fees and that type of thing. But obviously you have certain support models. you have certain donation models that you can redo. Like we know certain distros are kind of changing the way, hey, if you want these applications, we'll bundle it for you and we'll charge a certain amount. There are ways to make money here that are really untapped. And I think the first, big company to really do that is going to have a lot of money coming their way. I mean, when we think about it, your first $1 trillion companies, as I've mentioned before, didn't make their money from just clouds. They made their money initially from the desktop. Money is there to be made for companies. They just need to kind of open their eyes to the possibilities and not just assume, well, people are used to not paying for it in any form or fashion, so they never will. Right. We got to find the right model that fits the community.
Exactly. There's multiple models that work for open source, and there's bound to be something that would work for a desktop approach too. And I when I was saying the proprietary aspect of Valve, I was trying to. It was actually, admittedly, not well said. But what I was trying to say is that Valve is one of those examples of a company that comes into the Linux and open source market, and that didn't. I don't think they had any open source prior to their involvement in Linux, and then all of a sudden they, they come into the community, they embrace the open source, and they start releasing a ton of stuff for the ecosystem and for the open source approach. So I think they're a perfect example of once you embrace the company who wants to be a part of the platform, and then allow them to gradually join the philosophy as well, then they're bound to do it because they see the benefit of it. And I think Valve is a great example of that.
Yep.
So we got some interesting news recently about the KDE and Gnome team joining forces at the Linux App Summit, and it's kicking off in Barcelona, Spain, and it's promising to be an incredible opportunity for advancements for both projects in the terms of collaboration for app streams and stuff like that. So starting in November 12th, KDE and Gnome devs will be working together on cross-project development that will be related to potentially to benefit the entire Linux ecosystem. We don't really know exactly what is going on as far as like what specifics they're talking about. They have there's been some reports saying that they're going to be working on a collaborative desktop, but that's not what's going to happen. The development is more of an app approach. Like they haven't really said how that collaboration is going to happen, whether they're going to be like doing API collaboration or something. But there's a lot of potential for this, and it sounds awesome that they're.
Could you imagine though for a moment thinking about them working on a collaborative desktop? How amazing that would be! I know it's not happening. I just love the thought of it.
Right.
Because, yeah.
Having collaboration in the sense of like they're consolidating their efforts into a single awesome desktop. That would be great because you'd get the design benefits from Gnome and the functionality benefits of KDE. Like that be a huge potential. The
brain trust there would be outstanding. Right. Like the room would explode with that much brain power in them collaborating on stuff. But I'm just happy that they're collaborating together on some projects here, and they gave some examples there, Michael. Some of the projects they'll be working on.
Oh yeah. They said that they'll be working on creating and packaging various different applications for distributing and stuff, design and usability, commercialization, and also some community platform and that kind of in a Linux app ecosystem kind of stuff. But what they said, the Neil McGovern, who has previously been on the episode of this Destination Linux, he said based on this was Linux App Summit represents one of the many steps towards a thriving desktop ecosystem. By partnering with KDE, we show the desire to build the kind of application ecosystem that demonstrates that open source and free software is important. The technology and organization we build to achieve this is valuable and necessary.
Yeah, so I think this is really interesting because there's been some discussions in the community about individuals kind of, saying, oh, Gnome's the best, oh, KDE's the best, or this. And honestly, as somebody who gets passionate about the projects that I'm using or working on, I'm as guilty as anybody. I love XFCE. It's my favorite desktop. And there are things that certain desktops do that, require, I think, some feedback from the community, like, Gnome tiling or Gnome removing features or KDE being overly complex, or XFCE can sometimes look old out of the box depending on who's implementing it on their desktop. I think those are fair critiques, but that doesn't take away from the fact that I know all of us here are happy that those choices exist. We know people utilize them. They may not be for us, and therefore we'll say, hey, I don't use Gnome, or I don't use this desktop environment or this distro. And that doesn't mean the work behind them is not appreciated. So I think there's some truth to the messaging out there, like, hey, people stop going out there and saying, oh, this is better than this, or trying to do these kind of competitions against the different pieces. But there's also some truth to say that if you don't critique anything, if we just like whatever it is, it's great, it's wonderful, flowers and daisies and la la la, that's equally not as beneficial either. So,
I would argue it's even worse because it promotes complacency and it fundamentally handicaps us from ever solving problems.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of sensitivity I see out there in the Linux ecosystem right now from certain development teams and those within certain communities, basically just trying, anytime anybody has any critique of anything, trying to minimize that critique or minimize their opinion, because who are they? And I think, like you said, Noah, that can be equally as dangerous out there. I think the way we critique things is certainly important, right? There's no reason to start your sentence with, you suck, for instance. You could start with, hey, I appreciate this, but this is an issue that I have with this desktop environment.
Yeah.
And I think that type of feedback is very important coming from any platform out there, whether it is a podcast, a news site, or a standard user. We have to be open to that. Now, how we communicate is important, but that critiquing is how we get better. That's how products get better. That's how businesses know what to work on next.
Absolutely. It also can like open horizons as well. Like, for example, I'm a fan of KDE, and I've made that very publicly known. But I don't use the workflow that KDE has. Like, that's not the default workflow for KDE is not what I want. I actually use the GNOME workflow inside of KDE. So like by using GNOME and experiencing how they structure their workflow, that's the only way for me to have known what it was to be able to implement it in KDE is my preference. So like, even though I don't prefer to use GNOME, I do like their workflow a lot. So like, there's different pieces you can take from one or the other and combine them to make a better experience for your own usage. And there's many different ways of taking that. Taking something that you can see, like, this might not be good for you, but there's certain pieces of it that you could say that these are good things. So critiquing something and saying you don't necessarily like this as your personal preference doesn't mean you don't like it in general and you don't like think that it's worth existing or whatever. There are some, like, I agree that the overall the debates about whether something should exist or not, or whether people saying that this is terrible because it's not their preference, and like that kind of thing is ridiculous and not helpful. But in the sense of like, this particular thing has a flaw here, it would be great if you could address it this way, or here's a possible solution that you might consider. That kind of critique is, I think, not only beneficial, I think it's necessary for improving on all sides, because you can improve the user experience and improve the development experience of making stuff. Because a lot of people who are in I've had conversations in various different projects where I would give a suggestion and then they would respond with, I've never seen this before, even though all of the competitors had that exact thing I was suggesting, and I was just trying to get them to do like having a feature that was universal and was expected by the users, but the developers didn't know that was expected, and because they hadn't tried the other things, so they might not be aware of a potential benefit that you could show them. And I think that that's another benefit. Like, being critical is a good thing as long as you do it respectfully.
Right. So I think one of the other interesting things out of this article is the fact that these developers are not, into this competitive mode that you would typically see, right? There's not this KDE versus GNOME amongst the developers themselves here. Now, this collaboration hasn't happened in a while, so I can't say that holistically. The last time this happened apparently was back in 2009. But you can see they're open to working with each other. And the more that this type of collaboration happens and we bring the developers across the board together, the better I think Linux is going to be for it. And Noah, this is something you've mentioned quite a lot, that a lot of this fracturing, you've argued that the fracturing at this point is actually starting to become harmful to Linux. So I'm pretty sure you're going to be excited about this, I would think.
Yeah, I think choice is good when you have a problem with not enough choice. I think choice is bad when you have too many choices and not enough action being taken on any one of the choices, right?
Yeah. I mean, what you're basically saying is we don't go in depth. We have all these choices that kind of stay on this high level of resolving whatever issue or whatever problem or whatever software is attempting to do, but nobody, because it's so
But opening
split,
a
nobody
PDF can
gets
still
down
pitch
to the
that,
details.
depending on where the PDF came from and how it was created. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of projects that have that issue where you as an outsider, you see the solution, but they, like, the projects themselves don't want to address it because that's not something that they find interesting. So they only want to work on. There's a few projects for sure that only want to work on the things that they want to work on. And if there's a problem that is a user experience problem or whatever, but it's not something they're interested in, they're just going to ignore it. And that's an issue that does exist.
I don't necessarily have a problem with that, because I think that I think developers tend to do their best work when they're working on things they're passionate about. So I don't have necessarily a problem with that. But what I do think is that we have to be realistic and manage our expectations realistically. If we want to compete in the same level as macOS or Windows, then we have to provide those users with the same resources that they have become accustomed to in macOS and Windows.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I don't necessarily have a problem with it either. I just think that there needs to be, in those situations, there needs to be at least some kind of a third party, not a third party, but like a separate department or whatever of these projects that are like trying to help the guidance of it. And like, hey, whenever you are done with the thing that you want to work on, would you be willing to spend time working on this that you might not be?
You mean project management?
Essentially, a project management, yes. Because there's a lot of projects that would benefit greatly. That would be, so much better if they just had a little bit of like if they were willing to accept the guidance of, not necessarily an outsider, but someone who would, who cares about the project but is not necessarily a developer who could go in and fix it for them and stuff. Like, because there's a lot of projects I've been told to, like, not necessarily, I'm not going to specifically, because there's been like, I can at least count like a dozen that have done this, where if you suggest a feature to be changed or a setting to be changed, and they'll say like, yeah, you can go do it, and it's not that hard, you can do it, here's the documentation. I'm not a developer. I'm not that kind of developer anyway. So like, I don't know how to do it. And if you look at the settings, and you could like, based on the changes, you could say, yeah, that probably would be easier for them to do it, but not necessarily for you to do it. So it creates this weird where they're wanting to help you become a part of the contribution, but they don't really take into consideration of like the person who is wanting to help is not in that position to be able to help that way.
Yeah. One of our patrons mentioned it would be amazing if they could tackle the theming between GNOME and KDE. Such interesting opportunities arise between these. I think the biggest mistake here is that the greatest desktop environment, clearly XFCE is not included in this collaboration. Oh, we're not supposed to do that, darn. No, but
I thought you were a KDE guy. What's wrong with you?
I'm teasing. I love them all. That's the problem. I like them all. So no, this is awesome. I love that they're getting together, and I can't wait to see and bring back to the community what things they were able to accomplish when this summit's over.
Yeah.
Linux Mint 19.2 beta has been released, and by the time you hear this podcast, the official 19.2 will be out. Features in the latest version include support until 2023. Update Manager now includes info on how long the kernel is to be supported, and switching kernels is even easier with the ability to add multiple kernels and remove multiple kernels through a GUI. Preferences were simplified, and so now you can use the newly introduced XApp G settings widgets. Logs are now persistent and rotated in /var/log/mint update.log, and the user interface has a number of improvements, which include a list of updates that refreshes automatically when the apt cache is being changed. The info dialog updates in real time. A warning is shown if a reboot is required after a kernel update. A warning is shown 90 days before your version of Linux Mint reaches EOL. And info bars are shown together with easier to dismiss. Overall, I think Linux Mint still remains the distro that people go to get introduced to Linux. Whether or not there are better alternatives for people to do that, I guess is a function of opinion. But certainly, if you are a Linux Mint fan, or if you've ever had any interest in Mint, definitely go check out the latest release, because these are some very appreciated, much needed improvements to Linux Mint.
Yeah, every once in a while, I will build a computer for, I'll be asked to build a computer for somebody. And usually I don't like to, I love building computers, but I don't like to build computers for just anybody, because that means I support it for that time. And I'm not set up to provide endless computer support. But there have been a couple cases where I've made exceptions. One was interesting because a mother wanted to build a gaming machine for her son who has various, mental conditions that keep him from focusing totally, and some other issues, and thought that maybe a computer could help him really engage differently. And so I built a machine for them, very powerful computer, and I put Windows on it because I knew that's what they would be used to. But I also put Linux Mint on it. And this is a few years back. So the mother recently...
Did you tell them? Like, do they know?
Yes, I told them. I said, I'm going to put this on a drive, and if you want to learn it, this is another thing that your son could dive into. And interestingly enough, the mother came to me recently wanting to do upgrades and things like that, and they wanted to... Somebody had come over and worked on the machine and wiped out the Mint installation, and they wanted it back on the machine. So working with them on that. But Mint, like you said, is such a great introduction to people who've never used Linux. This individual has no resource really to go and learn about Linux other than what's on the web and podcasts and things like that. But it's so easy to use and to understand initially coming from a Windows system that this individual is utilizing the Linux Mint install that's in Grub, meaning they're selecting that over Windows when they're going in. And I think that speaks volumes about Linux Mint in itself. Now, some of these updates here, I was personally really interested in, specifically because, I've talked about the Linux kernels being for LTS distros or even Ubuntu's and things where you have 6 months to a year in between different releases, even their non-LTS versions, where you can fall pretty far behind in that 6 months in some of the hardware enablement capabilities, depending, especially if you're using AMD, or even other hardware out there, such as Wacom tablets, ARM64 support, all of that type of thing. Having the ability to easily move to a different kernel. A lot of people say UKUU. I actually had issues getting UKUU working with Pop! OS entirely. I love that Mint is basically building in their own kernel system here to allow you to move to different kernels as you want. If you want a more stable kernel, you have that option right there in a GUI. You can have multiple kernels. Maybe you want to boot into a LTS kernel most of the time, but you want to do some testing, maybe even getting involved in kernel development, which requires you to have multiple kernels involved in there, allow you to have multiple kernels to boot into and easily remove and update them all through a GUI, I think is awesome.
So this actually reminds me of a thing that the Linux Mint is one of those distros that I've been critical of the past, but in a constructive way. That some people have actually said that I'm a hater on Linux Mint. It's like, well, not at all, because there's a lot of things that Linux Mint does that are awesome. So I think it is. I agree, Ryan. It is one of those distributions that is like the go-to distros that you give to someone who's brand new, because it provides a lot of benefits for those brand new users. And it might not be the best distro for everyone, but in terms of like beginner users, it's a great distribution. I actually gave it to someone who was like 76 or 75, something like that, and it was the first time they ever used Linux. And the funny thing is that their son is also a Linux user, and he was a sysadmin for Linux, and was trying to explain to them to use Linux, and was going over like I call it the neckbeard approach. And it's the one where you're trying to give the technical reasons of why someone should use Linux, and trying to convince them on the technical merits of it when that person doesn't care. And I used for that particular person, I used a pragmatic approach, where it was a approach to say, this is why it would benefit you and your workflow, and how it would make it easier for you to use your computer. So when I told him that way, he was like, yeah, sure, let's try it. So I did him a dual boot system. And then probably 3 or 4 months later, I was like, so how many times have you booted into Windows since I gave you Mint? And he said, what? I forgot that I could do that. So like it's awesome, because Mint gives you that ability to make it like an easy beginner access. It's familiar in the sense of the paradigm. It has the stability of the sense of like it's an LTS base, but still gets updates in a lot of ways, including the kernel stuff. Like it has a lot of benefits, but just like everything, nothing's perfect. So there's room for improvement. But like I agree that Mint is one of those distributions that has a lot of benefits, and I'm glad it exists.
Blender 2.80 has been released, and it is awesome. So this new release of Blender has announced the following changes. This is a massive overhaul, I think, looking at the list of things coming out here. And Blender is so important to the Linux ecosystem that seeing this amount of changes, this amount of improvements is just absolutely amazing to see. So first up, totally redesigned user interface, which Blender is an incredibly powerful tool. You can do so many different things with it. But its interface at times, especially when I think they right-clicked by default for everything, which I know they changed later, but things like that have been annoying. Sometimes it's difficult with all the different things you can do, from 3D modeling to video editing to switch into different scenes, and they're working on that as well. So now you have application templates for what you're wanting to do. So you can select, hey, I want to edit videos, and it's going to change your interface for you for editing videos. I want to do 3D animations. You'll have templates for that. Left click selection is now default behavior. New real-time renderer, Eevee, is in there. Cycle improvements, new widgets and toolbars, new Grease Pencil 2D support, general 3D modeling improvements, 2D animation improvements, sculpting, VFX, and video editing all have seen love in this recent release here. It's just an incredible tool with endless possibilities. And in fact, if you don't like any video editor on Linux, you could use Blender as a full professional video editing suite.
Literally going to be my next question. Have you ever used it as an actual video editor?
Yes.
I did. I used to make videos on my channel. There are probably a dozen or so that were done in Blender. And back then, this was when right click was default, and you kind of had to set up your own template to make it for video editing. Mm-hmm. But once you had that set up, it was very smooth and very fast at rendering. And of course, since it's completely open source, you don't have anything where it's locked down, where you can only export in this resolution or any tags or anything like that. It's extremely powerful. But I would say that tools that are made specifically for video editing, like Lightworks and Kdenlive, and those, at least back then when I did video editing in Blender, were superior because they were focused on that one thing.
Yeah.
But going into Blender again in 2.80, I'm actually excited to try video editing in there again and see what improvements they have. In fact, they've added a bunch of VFX effects to their video editing. So it's the Swiss Army knife for Linux in so many ways of what you can do with it. The learning curve for me was pretty steep. I had a book on Blender. I did YouTube videos to kind of figure it all out, but it's getting better. That's why they're doing these improvements with the interface to not just focus on, well, everybody now who's a professional in Blender is used to right click, but that makes sense to nobody new coming in. So that right click's your default.
So let me ask you this. Hindsight being 2020, you've used Lightworks, you've used Kdenlive. Is Blender still a good tool for doing generic video editing, or is it more a function of, at the time, it was one of the only tools that could get us there? Now we've got more tools that are more specifically designed to deal with this.
I think Blender could very easily become better than Kdenlive. Mm-hmm. I really do. I think all the potential's there. Whether they executed on it or not, I don't know. I haven't been able to play with 2.8 0 yet here to see all the changes that they made, but I will tell you everything there, from their video caching system to GPU acceleration, hardware enablement capabilities, are all there within Blender. So it actually makes it in some ways a better option for people to utilize. And because if you learn the interface in Blender, you could also create your own 3D animation intros and outros, and all the possibilities that are in there. If you took the time to learn it, I would say you could actually do more than you could even do in Lightworks. Now, would it be simpler? No, because in Lightworks, I go and I grab a template they already created for me, drag it in there, and it's all kind of done. But if you're somebody who really wants to get involved and have everything customized that you build, taking the time to learn Blender, I think would be a fantastic use of time if somebody's interested in that stuff. And you could get the same results, maybe even slightly better than some of the other open source alternatives out there. It's just the learning curve is steep. Whereas Kdenlive, I can hand to anybody who's ever edited a video ever, and they could probably figure out how to do all the basics, cutting, shrinking, all of that within a few seconds. Blender in the past was not that way. I don't know about the changes they've made.
I haven't used the 2.80 either. But they have done a significant, like the number they chose is weird. like they chose the 2.80 from the previous 2.79, but the difference between 2.79 and 2.80 is like 4 years of development and massive differences, and it's just odd that they did that, but because it easily would be like a 3.0 or whatever. But there's so many things that is improved in this latest version of Blender, and the interface is one of the most important things that people have been asking for like 2 decades. Please fix this. And the right click thing was so weird, and there was tutorials about like when you the first like top like 5 things to do when you first start using Blender. Change this and go back to like a normal structure of like using the left click like everybody expects it to be. And like there's a lot of stuff that is improved. It they made it like a new theming system for like it looks a lot better. It's got better icons. Like overall, they've improved the layout, the user experience, the user interface. Like it's great. I haven't used this particular version for video editing yet, but the video editing in Blender is fantastic. It is super powerful. You can do almost everything you could think of once you figure out how to use it, because it's so ridiculous. Like it's so specific in every way. Like every function that you want to do, even if it's a super simple thing or whatever, it is so specific, unique workflow that doesn't matter if you've used any video editor whatsoever before. You will have no idea how to get started, and you will need tutorials and you will need videos to demonstrate things. Because even when I was using it, I would like run into the weird barriers that I don't know the actual like specific letter key that I'm supposed to hit in order to switch to this mode that I needed to do in order to navigate the way. Because like in video editing in Blender, you have like 4 or 5 different modes that your interaction with the timeline is different depending on what mode you're in, and you can't do all modes at the same time. You have to switch back and forth. But as far as power goes, it can do basically everything you want it to do. And when you add into the 3D modeling, the animation stuff, it's a super powerful, awesome application. And the biggest hurdle it's always had is the problem of the learning curve is so steep that people will just abandon it super quickly when they get into it, because it's like you got to spend hours. Previously, I don't know about 2.80, but you used to have to spend hours. When you get into
Blender for the first time, I just opened 2.80. Unfortunately, like a lot of these distros that are not rolling, the only versions available in Pop! OS is the old 2.79 version. So I went and downloaded Blender through the tar, and you can, basically just click on the launcher there and play with it. When you first go into Blender, you still have the 3D animation as your first setup. So it doesn't ask you, hey, what do you want to do? Which I think they need to change. They need to have it so, do you want a video edit? Do you want a 3D model? Because you still just have kind of that triangle there and a camera. But if I go to File, New, it has a section, do you want to do a new video editing file, which is new. And I click on that, and I'm telling you, they have redone this video editing section a ton. The interface looks extremely familiar and easy to use. Compared with prior iterations, they have all the proper scenes and outputs and timeline sequence set up here by default on the interface. And this is very, very impressive already from what I'm seeing, the work that they've done here. And I'll go one step further and say this. If you took the time to learn Blender, I think you have more opportunity to find a job related to utilizing Blender than you would, for instance, finding a job with Kdenlive or finding a job that has any relation to Lightworks. If you utilize Blender, you have animation studios you could work for, game development studios you could work for, video editing studios you could work for. You have the potential of professional applying what you've learned to a professional job. Far more opportunity, I think, with Blender than you would with any of those applications.
Very true. There's also people who are like VFX artists that use specifically just use Blender. And they work on like movies and all kinds of like commercials and short films and stuff like that. That because Blender is so powerful, it allows them to do those types of things in a professional level. And Blender is definitely one of the best. And like I haven't checked it out, but I'm based on your excitement. I'm now super excited to try the video editing of it, because if it looks like a real editor and it doesn't have and it has an expected workflow, the potential it has is awesome.
Yep, absolutely.
So up next in the show is something that I'm a big fan of, and that is the latest release of Latte Dock. So Latte Dock is a Qt-based dock system that is mainly for the KDE Plasma experience, but I'm pretty sure you can use it in other things like LXQt. But I use it in Plasma because it allows me to do so many cool things. And the latest release has a lot of cool new features, such as the ability to have a new color painting, so that Latte can paint itself based on the active Windows color. So if you have you can make it like having if you use it in panel form, you can have the panel adjust its color based on the application that you are currently using. And you can also has different painting systems for the transparency of it. It's really awesome. And there's also new indicators that are available for various different installed effects for like the Latte effects page. There's also multiple layouts available now. Like you previously could only had it like by default there was like a regular panel layout or regular dock layout, and then like a Unity approach where you can kind of like combine these things in a different way. But they're now adding more layouts, environment improvements, and they're also making it better and more easy to choose between the panel and the dock settings. And then they've redesigned that in order to make it more obvious in how it works. They've also improved the badges and improved like bug fixes, documentations, and stuff like that. And Latte Dock is one of my favorite things about using Plasma because it has support for all Plasma widgets. So anything you can put in a Plasma panel will also work in a Latte Dock, it has so much potential and power because of that flexibility. So
well, when you set up my machine when you were here, because I asked Michael, I said, hey, I don't really, when I install KDE or something, I pretty much just leave it however the developers left it. I'll do some minor changes and things, but I told you to set up my computer like you would, and you use Latte Dock as your full panel. Mm-hmm. Like because of the widget implementation, you can put your application launcher and everything inside of it. And it was really awesome what you did with my machine, utilizing a lot of the changes you do really relate back to Latte Dock and implementing that in a unique way.
Yep.
To KDE. So I absolutely love this. And did I hear, I thought there was a conversation earlier with one of our patrons that Latte Dock is pretty much developed by one single person?
There are contributors, but it's mostly one person, yeah.
It's amazing what they are able to accomplish with this dock because it is one of the most flexible. It's very much like KDE. It's so in-depth. There are so many things that you can do with it. But one of the difference I would say with Latte Dock is its initial settings and setup is very simplified. Anybody could figure out what it is, but there's so much advanced features hidden within it that allow you to do so much more if you want to with Latte Dock that just make it absolutely stellar.
Yeah, and they've actually improved this release also improves the way the settings work, so it makes it more obvious because there's certain things that were worded weirdly and you'd have to test it to see what it actually meant, and they've actually improved the experience there too. But Latte Dock is very powerful. By default, it has like a regular general settings approach, and then you can like check the advanced settings options, and you can have like a ton more to control opacity, to control how it interacts with when windows touch the border of the dock, or all kinds of stuff. Variety of different ways you can change it and customize it. But the Latte Docks, I think the Latte Dock itself is great as a dock. It works quite well in that sense. But as soon as I realized that you could convert it into a panel and then basically use every widget, it becomes way more important, and it allows you to do so much more to it.
Not only is it more functional, but it also makes it look like it belongs, right? Like one of the things that I've really struggled with in finding docks that work really well is one that feels like it's actually integrated or was designed by the desktop environment. They always feel like a hack-on piece of crap. And Latte Dock was, I think, the first one that I ever used where I was like, hey, this is actually legitimately awesome. It feels like it was like at least they used it with KDE before they shipped it.
Yeah, and I totally agree. It fits so well, but also at the same time, I think it's a better experience in terms of like if you replace the Plasma panels with the Latte Dock, and you put the same stuff in the Latte Dock that you have in that panel, it's still even better because you can control where things are positioned more easily and not have to worry about like dragging a spacer to a certain size to position where you want it. You just say, here's an spacer, fill out whatever space it is, and it will just automatically detect where it needs to be. So like there's a lot of things about the Latte Dock that makes it so much better. And also some of the settings in Latte Dock are better, and like the IntelliHide works better in Latte Dock than it does in the Plasma panel itself. So like there's a lot of features that I wish the Plasma panel people would just pull in from Latte Dock, or have a collaborative effort to make Latte Dock more reasonably possible to replace the panels even. I don't know. It's such a good tool that doesn't, like, because it's called a dock, people have an assumption of what it's supposed to be. But it can be, and it is that. It does have that function, but it can do so much more, that it has so much more potential to make it a much better experience. And the way I use my workflow is not 100% dependent on Latte Dock, but the panel-wise is, because like the way I do the Gnome workflow has a lot of interactions with the Latte Dock, and I think that without the Latte Dock, it would be much harder to do.
So Purism releases the final specs on their Libram 5 phone that's coming out. So this is a device that was successfully crowdfunded all the way back in 2017. The Libram 5 claims to be a device that focuses on security by design and protection by default. It runs FSF endorsed Pure OS, and states trackers are disabled by default, and they provide more fine-tuning for user controls for their privacy and security within their software. And they also have manual kill switches for camera, mic, Wi-Fi, and baseband out there. In addition to selling just the phone, they're also selling kits as well that come with monitors, keyboards, and mice, so that you can basically utilize this as your full desktop, similar to, I guess, Samsung DeX, where you can dock your Android device and utilize it as a desktop computer. So the final specs for this device is a 5.7-inch IPS TFT screen at 720 by 1440. So, Michael, when we were talking about this is very similar to the Pine phone.
Yeah.
I think it's the exact same
resolution
as the Pine phone.
Same resolution.
It comes with the iMX8M quad core, which is a 1.5 gigahertz processor, 3 gigabytes of memory, 32 gigabytes of eMMC internal storage, micro SD storage expansion slot, 8 megapixel front camera, 13 megapixel back camera, USB Type-C. It does include a Courage jack, which is awesome, and a 3500 milliamp battery. So they're still stating this device will ship Q3 of 2019. But with this price point, I was pretty disappointed personally in the hardware. It's $649 for the phone.
No, that's what it was in the early bird special. Now it's $699.
Okay, so I mean that's a very expensive phone. I get that they are. It's a very expensive phone for the specs that you're seeing here. Now I do get that they're putting a lot of additional engineering and security and privacy switches and things like that in it in the background, but I've seen a lot of comments from individuals saying, okay, well, I can go get Lineage OS or E on a much newer device with a lot more RAM, a lot faster processor, and a lot higher resolution screen for less than half than that. So it's an interesting thing, because I encourage the fact that we're getting mobile devices. This is what I want. So I do not want to be negative on this device and say, the specs are terrible or this is horrible, because I don't think they're terrible, but it is a little less than what I would expect for the amount of money that they're asking here. So what were your thoughts?
I think that it's interesting, because I totally agree that it's disappointing in the terms of the hardware compared to the price. Now, I will say that there is an extra section of it where you could say that what it's the premium that you're paying for, what is that money going towards? Well, it's going towards the privacy effort. It's going towards the fact that they're building their own operating system for mobile, and that's based on Linux. The fact that they're working on something that is something we've been wanting for a very long time. So you have to kind of decide whether that premium is worth it to you to support a company for that purpose, and also because the company is pretty small in comparison to, like, you want to get a Samsung device for the same price, it's going to be way more powerful, but also they have a huge manufacturing plant and everything, so they can make it more powerful and cost less because of that. But in terms of the average consumer, they're going to look at this phone and see the comparison and the price, and it's not even a chance. So this is, in my opinion, this is a Linux enthusiast phone, someone who wants to have Linux on their phone, and they want to have a full Linux system, and they're willing to pay that premium for that. But in terms of actual hardware, I think it's pretty disappointing, actually, because based on the other things in the same price range.
I hate to sound like a one-trick pony, but is this not yet another example of Purism failing to understand their core audience or core customer base? Like the kind of people that care about all of these privacy things, are they the kind of people that have the budgets to buy these kind of computers? And the people that have these budgets to buy these kind of computers, do you think they're looking for a super private computer, or do you think they're just looking for something that runs Linux well enough so they can take it to the office? Like, do you know what I mean? Is that really that magical user base that has thousands and thousands of dollars to spend, and they want a one-off, not one-off, but a very bespoke product?
Yeah,
Is that, you know what I mean?
It's an interesting question because Purism's kind of known for this in their laptop. I remember looking at, well, maybe I'll get a Purism laptop because I've never tried one, and I want to try anything that's hardware related. So I go and I look up the prices of it for the specs that they have, and I get that they're putting some additional work into the hardware for kill switches and trying to, I think, even provide some ability to separate certain things, processor executions.
They even like did a separation for the IME for the Intel.
That's what I was thinking. Yeah, the IME. So they're doing some additional things which do require obviously research and development, require work to implement. So I get it, but the price is so much higher for what you're getting that it's hard for me to swallow. I love privacy and security. I love the idea of having physical kill switches. To Noah's point, though, I'd probably have to test them with a voltage meter, make sure they're actually killing it. But and any device, not just theirs, but any device that states that they have that. But I love the idea of these things. At the same time, am I willing to spend, $500-600 more to acquire it? I don't know, because to me, when I looked at the Pine phone, you've got very similar specs here for $199 that also has kill switches built into it. It's
is based on a Linux operating system. Like they're not making that operating system. That maybe that's one of the overheads they don't have to worry about. But they're collaborating with, like, the main goal was to have a Linux-based operating system.
I mean, it is less powerful, but not by much. They pretty much have nearly identical processors. They're both based on the Cortex A53. The Pine phone has a little bit less memory, but I think 1 gigabyte less. They both have Type-C support. They both can handle up to 4K video and Ultra HD resolutions on them if you were to dock them, say, for a desktop. So I would, and not that I'm not happy that we don't have an option that somebody's building out there, but I probably would personally lean towards the Pine phone just because it's $199 versus $699.
See, but
I think it's actually cheaper.
That makes sense though, right? Like the kind of people that are interested in privacy, security focused phones, they are willing to spend. I could see them spending $200, $300, even $400, $500 on a smartphone. I just don't see them spending, in the laptop's case, right? I don't see them spending $2,000 on a smartphone when they can get an iPhone for $1,000.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, yeah, but I'm talking about in the laptop case, they do have, like, if you compare the hardware in like System 76 versus Purism. If you compare just the hardware, the prices are fairly similar, but the hardware in the System 76 is more up to date and more powerful and all that stuff. So like that's kind of, I don't think Purism has updated their laptops in a couple of years or so. But if you compare the Pine phone versus the Libram 5, it's the hardware is so close. Like 2 gigs of RAM versus 3 gigs of RAM. The resolution is exactly the same. The screen itself is very close, like the 5.7 versus 5.9. Like the Bluetooth is the same. The ability to do the different Wi-Fi spectrums is the same. Like it's interesting because the Libram 5 is something that people have been wanting for a very long time and are willing to pay a premium for that.
Clearly, yeah, they got funded fully.
Yeah, and it also in 2017. I think that this would actually be a reasonable phone. This is a reasonable quality phone, even for that price. But 2 years later, it still hasn't come out, and they pushed the deadline back multiple times, and they're shipping a 2017 powerful phone. Like if you go get the OnePlus 5T, you can supports Lineage and E, and the price of that phone now is like $350 or something, and it's more powerful than the Libram 5. So it's like this weird situation where I am so happy that there's companies doing this, and there's a focus on doing this with the privacy and the Linux as the operating system and everything, but the price is just, in my opinion, just too high.
And if the price is too high, like look what I just spent on processors and things for my desktop computer so that I can play pixelated games on it. If the price is too high for me, I'm looking at it going, the price is really hard to swallow with those specs. I can't imagine a lot of people who even have the money to spend on that would want to throw it at this particular device. But I want to bring us back to something, because I'm seeing a lot of, and this was my struggle with this article. We have to be honest and give our critiques on things, but I see a lot of people kind of picking on everything Purism is doing. I see them picking on, if they release numbers of how many people donated, there are people who have nothing to do with Purism going out and pulling reports, saying, oh, there's a data blip here, what are you doing? And leaving comments and Twitter that are pretty negative and stuff. So I'm interested what your take is for those of you, Noah and Mike, who have been in Linux longer than me. Why is there this negative viewpoint out there? And it seems like a lot of projects that should be at least trying to encourage, like we're saying, hey, maybe it's not for us, but I'm happy they're at least out there trying to do something, kind of beating up on Purism.
Couple of things there. Purism has had a history of coming out and saying something and then not delivering on it. We're working with Intel, and they're gonna custom make all of this stuff, and there's stuff that any of us that have lived in the tech community for a nanosecond look up and go, Dell can't even do that. There's no way you're gonna you don't even understand the magnitude of what you're saying and how ridiculous what it is. And it's why they got called out at Linux Fest Northwest, right? They're up there, they're giving a presentation. They're like, here's the thing, here's a launch date. And a couple people in the room were like, there will not be a product shipped by the date. They won't have it. And the problem is then you have, PR oversights, I guess, as it were, where you end up hiring somebody who has a history of saying very inflammatory things and acting in a very inflammatory way. And what results is, and I'm not saying that the people that they hire are effective at drawing attention to their product and doing a good job talking about their product, and maybe don't even have the product's best interest at heart. I'm sure all of those things are true. I'm just saying that they have made a series of controversial decisions, and I think a lot of people have responded very negatively to that.
So they're basically so excited, what you're saying, Noah, that, I look at it a different way. Maybe I'm not looking at the whole picture because I haven't been in the space long enough to see it all, but I see it as that is a mistake what they're doing, but that it's not like they're like these projects where they say, hey, we're going to do something and it never happens. Right. It just sounds like they're disorganized enough to say, hey, we're going to get people to land on the moon.
I think I agree. I think it's very important that we acknowledge I am not in any way passing a judgment on intentions, right? I have no idea. It could very well be that they were told by a representative of Intel, hey, this is what we're going to be willing to do for you guys. I have no idea what the intentions are. I'm not claiming to say whose fault it is or if there's malice or anything like that. I'm just saying that there is a definitive history of say one thing, something else happens, say one thing, something else happens. And some of us are very, get kind of frustrated by that. And I don't say that, like, I don't have anything against Purism. I say hi to Todd if I run into him. We've had him on the show. Like, I understand and appreciate what Purism is doing. I'm glad that there is some competition. I just approach I take everything that they do and say with a grain of salt. And I don't think that's unreasonable. And I don't think that's something I have to apologize for. I feel pretty comfortable in saying, hey, they have made some decisions that take me back sometimes.
But you're not the only one, and I think the way you're saying it is extremely respectful and sticks to the fact that, hey, this is the history, and things seem to be exaggerated a lot in that. But I actually see this outside in the community pretty heavily of people just kind of piling on, and I'm not seeing this just with Purism, by the way. This is kind of happening in other instances as well, where there seems to be this club that you have to be in within Linux, and if you're in that social circle in that club, then you can say whatever you want and kind of do what you want. But if you're outside of that social circle, then your product's junk, and we really don't want to hear from you. And I'm seeing it more and more, and as a new person, I was curious what your take is. Is this normal? Maybe I'm just being too sensitive to it, but it just seems like a lot of people have no business really going in and necessarily piling on and picking on certain projects that's happening a lot, especially in the Twitterverse area.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think that Purism has this situation where they're having to deal with a reputation they kind of got off on the wrong foot, and they're not really fixing that to going forward. Which in the video version, you might have seen me randomly smile. It was because when Noah said something about how they'd say things and then not ever follow through in a lot of cases, and it made me laugh about the fact that in the beginning of this episode, I talked about how I finally did a video I've been talking about that I was going to do. So
Michael is the equivalent of Purism.
Yeah, but here's the difference. Here's the difference. Here's the difference. It's not a function of delays. It's a function of dishonesty, right? Intentional or unintentional, right? When I say, Michael, you were planning on getting that video out within 2 months and it didn't happen. What happened? You're like, oh, yeah, I didn't have time. I got lazy. Whatever. And then people go, oh, okay, well, that's just Michael, right? And everybody accepts you. Nobody really judges. Like, I'm serious though. Nobody really judges you because you're just honest about it. You're like, hey, I didn't get around to it.
Well, he's also not doing a GoFundMe for the video for raising $10,000 and then not.
Right. And then the other side of that, right, is to get the video once it's released. I mean, let's come on. It's a YouTube video. Click on it, right? We're not talking about a $2,500 box. So, yeah, I think it's a very complex issue. I will say this, to throw Purism a bone. It is incredibly difficult to do anything in the open source community. So we launched Linux Delta, and a huge thanks to everybody that has been contributing to the site and has been offering suggestions and stuff like that. But it honestly, working in a business for so long in which I take a service, I provide a service, people pay for a service, they thank you for a service, and we move on. Like, that's the metric that I've been using for so long, and it's so interesting when you give something to somebody for free, how quickly they just all of a sudden grab onto it and go, oh, that's mine, and this is what it should be, and this is what you should do, and this is what you've done wrong, and all of that. You know, like, there's helpful criticism, and then there are people that are just out to tear you down. And as a Linux community, we're really bad about that. When a new company comes out, Steam offered support on Ubuntu. Isn't that great? We're going to have Steam on Linux. Isn't that It's not on Arch, not on Fedora.
It's proprietary. We can't use it. Or something like that. Yeah.
It's not on Deepin. You know what I mean? Like, we don't, like, come on. We never, so when this company comes out and they say, hey, we're going to make a privacy focused laptop, instead of just saying, hey, that's really great. When one comes to market, I'd be happy to buy it because that's a product I'm interested in. And even if the company isn't perfect, they're a tiny little company that is competing against massive industry. They're probably going to have some setbacks. Let's support them and embrace them. Instead, we tear them apart. And every little thing down to a video that comes out and gets released on the internet, we have to critique and criticize them. So to throw them a bone, they are doing work and continue to doing work and continue to succeed, I might add, in a environment that is very hostile to them, even if it is based on things they've said or done.
Yeah, and there's some aspects to it that's justified in the sense that when they, like, if they said, you know, if you notice that they mentioned Q3 in this particular release, or this announcement of saying Q3 is when they're going to release the phone. We're currently in about 45% through Q3, but they gave a range of, like, this is going to happen. And then previously they backtracked a couple times already, saying that this is, you know, they said January, then they said April, and et cetera. And they just delayed it when they could have just said, hey, this is what the time frame we think it will be, and the people would be like, okay. But when they gave a specific time frame, it kind of like it kind of tainted what people thought, and I think that's the problem. And like, they've done that on a multiple times.
But I think at the end of the day, they will deliver a product, and there are several products out there. There's several companies, probably hundreds, who have gone out, raised a bunch of money, said we're going to do this thing, and never gave anything back to people. So Purism at least has delivered, and I think will deliver a phone. But I was taking this even further outside of Purism to say, look at what happened just today, the day of recording, of people piling on Phoronix for something that heavily is out of their control. There's just so many examples I'm seeing, and I just think there's this toxicity that's starting to build towards. I mean, Phoronix, sure, you could go out there and pick little things that they need to change or update, but just imagine not.
Or you could pick specific examples. So again, where they came out and falsely reported information, and people got frustrated by that.
But like, I mean, we've made mistakes too. Sure. I don't think Phoronix goes out and does it on purpose.
No, I don't think so either. Like I said, I don't pass a judgment on intention. I think that I think the difference between us and Phoronix is that I think that a lot of people that come to this program understand that we approach this with a certain level of humility, whereas I've seen problems come out on a Friday and they'll release a correction not until Monday or Tuesday after they've incurred like this Reddit storm and Twitter storm of, hey, you're falsely reporting this stuff. So I mean, like again, I totally get where you're coming from, and I agree in principle that we need to be a less hostile community and a less toxic community. And at the same time, like, I have personally gotten bit by, you go on the air on a Sunday to talk about a story that you read about on Friday, and then it comes out on Tuesday that everything is wrong. And I just, like, that is such a frustrating experience. And it's like, come on, we really can't do any better. And I mean, this is not like, again, like this time it's out of their control, but sometimes it's not. Yeah. I guess, yeah.
And I'd say that's true for a lot of things. Like, I mean,
it is,
but
yeah.
I agree that the overall concept of like Purism has made mistakes, yes, and various different places have made mistakes, but Canonical's made mistakes, and they've made mistakes that are big mistakes, and they've made tiny mistakes. But in many cases and in many examples of various projects, they will get hate for like in the same level of hate, regardless of how big the mistake is. Like, for example, Canonical did that 32-bit thing, and that was a big mistake. Mm-hmm. But also, they were being yelled at for, making Unity. Not a big mistake. In fact, they didn't have a choice. They got yelled at for not making Unity anymore. Like, make up your mind. You're going to yell and scream at them for something that...
I wouldn't want to be held to the standards, too, that we seem to hold to. But I'll tell you the most shocking part to me is in Twitter allows you to see who likes certain things, and I've seen some very exaggerated comments on my Twitter about Phoronix. Like I said, you could make cases, like you said, Noah, hey, there are times where they may misreport something. Maybe the benchmarks that they do aren't really as intuitive as we'd like to believe. You could make all those critiques and they're fair. But when somebody makes a wild claim, wild claim, and then you see members of development community out there liking those comments, that's where I'm starting to really sit here and, man, I used to put some of these people on a pedestal, and I'm so disappointed to see that they're out there publicly supporting these comments to kind of take these projects down. And that's what's bothering me.
I mean, that's also true. I mean, there's I don't think it, okay, there's this thing that I don't like about there's a weird reputation that the Linux community has a hostile environment and like a hostile community, and I don't think that's true. I think there is definitely some hostility involved, and there's some toxicity involved, because I think that's true for every community, because there's always going to be someone who's trying to annoy someone just because they think it's fun or whatever other reason. But I think that the majority of the community is very open and especially the DL community is awesome. And like every time we've had conversations in the Telegram group, like it's a great experience. But
and we're not just saying that. I mean that. Like we have purposely focused on having that type of community. We wanted to draw in from the very beginning people who were kind and said thank you and appreciated work. And we're not perfect. I've gone out there and gone on tangents of things that made me mad and probably went too far. But at the end of the day, I think we really try, and our community tries.
We own up to mistakes, though, too. I mean, I feel like the one thing that we're missing here is ownership of mistakes and ownership of incorrect information, right? Like that is nobody. Do you notice that like nobody talks about the fact that the second Canonical reversed their decision, the internet hate immediately died, like just went to sleep dead, knocked out in the cold. Nobody is talking about that anymore. And the thing is, we don't acknowledge that. Like, we don't give ourselves any credit. Like, yes, Linux users got really upset. I think I know that we tend to disagree on this. We don't need to rehash it, but I think it wasn't as clear cut as a decision as I think you two think it was for Canonical. And so a lot of people made their voice known, and the second they reversed course, the internet mob went away. And so I think to a certain degree we have to acknowledge, like, people are pretty predictable. Like, we know what Linux users want. We know what Linux users don't want. When you do something they don't like, you're going to catch a lot of crap. When you do something they do like, you're not going to. And when you correct a mistake, they'll forgive you and move on. I feel like that's been shown more times than we're giving it credit.
I think it's different, though. I think the example of the Canonical thing is that this problem was it blew up and got huge and had a lot of reactions that were reasonably critical and also extremely hostile. That happened, and then they reverted it and it died down. But that was a significantly impactful decision that they wanted to make, versus sometimes where they would change a color of a theme and then be yelled at. The fact that they had, oh my goodness, they had the close button on the left side of the window. Hate them forever. That kind of reaction happens in so many ways that it's
outbursts of calling them literally the devil in their videos and things like that. And that my problem with that is the same people who are out there critiquing how ridiculous that video is are the same ones liking comments who are attacking other projects like Phoronix or Purism and liking those same exaggerated comments. I'm not talking about comments where, hey, Purism hasn't delivered on some things or Phoronix has made mistakes. I'm talking clearly things that Phoronix has no control over, and these same people who are impacted by this rage liking this. And this is bugging me because, these are people that I think at a point were very highly respected in the community, and you wouldn't expect that type of thing from. And it just seems to be growing. And I see in our Patreon comments a lot of people talking about tribalism in Linux. And I guess if I was to take my entire argument into one facet, it probably is kind of a tribalism of, hey, if you're in this group and you support these guys, then don't go over here and support the OpenSUSE guys or be a part of the Red Hat guys because we're canonical. There just seems to be this tribalism that still exists. And this is coming from somebody who's only been in Linux for 4 years. I hadn't really seen it this in depth, and maybe it's always been there, and I've just had rose-colored glasses on to the point that it seems to be happening right now. And I'm not sure what's changing, because at the first time, Linux desktop is so much better. We have products out there that people were trying to make to fill in these gaps, like phones and things, and now we're getting more tribalism than before. What's happening?
I'm fine. You know what? I'm fine with tribalism. I put a lot of thought into that. I'm done making excuses. I'm done pretending to be somebody I'm not. I drank the Kool-Aid. I'm in the call. I'm signed up. I'm in. I don't care what you say about me. I'm in 100%. There's people they get all upset and they're, oh, it's not a religion. It's a tool. It's just an upper, come on. You know what? My kids are on here. The videos of my family are on here. I just got done redoing my FreeNAS share, right? And it was like this. It was this really emotional experience, to be honest with you. Going back and moving all of my data from years and years and years and consolidating all of it onto one box, it really lets me know how important our digital lives are, because they're literally the record of our life. Mm-hmm. And so to start treating that as with some flippant, callous attitude of, well, I just use the best tool for the job. Windows is what they had at Best Buy, so that's what I came home with. I like my Apple stuff. It's just stupid. So I drank the Kool-Aid. I'm 100% in. And yeah, I'm tribalist. There are things that work better in Linux and things that work not as good in Linux. And for once in our geek lives, we're finally part of the club. I
actually don't agree that you are. I think you're actually the opposite of tribalism, because anytime anybody has brought something up that had a good counterpoint, you've always been willing to change your position on things. What I'm seeing is individuals who make a decision like, whatever it is, Fedora is the greatest desktop or the greatest distribution ever.
I agree.
And they keep that no matter what happens.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
That's the type of people.
Yeah,
all of us have our things that we love or that we stick to. But man, if you bring me a good point, I'll go and look at it. I'll go and hear you. And you've always been willing to do that. What I'm seeing is people just holding things
irrational tribalism
irrationally, and I'm used to that from the community. You'll see that from the community, different things, but people who hold weighted positions in the community kind of backing this type of thing is what is, I think, at the heart of the problem.
There is some tribalism that's, the example you're referring to is something that I think that is very very important about the whole irrational tribalism. Is something that happens. It seems to be happening more now in a more public approach. You could say that the tribalism stuff has been around forever. The joke about Arch Linux, by the way, I use Arch type thing. That is a joke that's been around for a long time. And it was mostly used as a playful thing. But there are some people who legit have this thing where if you don't use Arch, you're not a user of Linux. You're not a real Linux user or something like that.
Wait, that's not true?
No. This particular case. No, it's not.
Yeah. Oh, it's not.
That's what
my
Ryan
bad. Yeah,
told me.
no, it's not. No, it's not.
That's what Ryan told me.
But
That tribalist.
right.
Darn
But there's different aspects of like these people who are very they're very toxic if you don't agree with them. And that situation is like I think that like 99% of the people who use Linux are not like that. But the people who are like that are so loud.
You know what?
That
You
hear
nailed it
often.
right there. People get mad when you don't agree with them. How dare you have a different opinion? That actually is what sums up my argument.
That is the most that's the one I've experienced the most being involved in Linux for like 20 years. That's the most I've experienced is like if I slightly disagree with them, they just hate me forever. And if I agree with them, they're like, "Oh, well, you're not so bad." Like just 2 days ago you hated me. Like it's weird, that kind of thing. But I do want to point out that we all agree that
Arch is the best.
That Arch is good, but my point about that we agree on. I think we all agree that Star Trek is one of the best series ever. So I am totally down with being a completely irrational tribalism.
Wow. Why did you just do that?
Because there's no how to pronounce on tribalism. That's why.
No, not tribalism. Tribalism. That's
Tribalism.
very specific. Tribalism.
Hey,
I
Mike,
like how you brought
Michael.
back the passionate
Michael.
conversation to Star Trek.
never ever say tribalism again. Okay, thanks.
I will never say tribalism again.
Thank you.
After I just said tribalism right then and there. Tribalism is great.
So Chris Wright, the CTO for Red Hat, recently took to Red Hat to Reddit rather to answer some questions from the community. Now, first of all, I just want to say that I think this is really awesome. That high level CTO level people from a $34 billion company goes on Reddit, goes straight into the community, the Lion's Den, to ask questions. So he did an AMA, and Chris was asked about Red Hat supporting gaming more in the future. Chris responded that Red Hat continues to support game development, backends, rendering, as well as making partnerships that push gaming forward. He also mentioned that Red Hat sponsors events for game development, listing DreamHack in Atlanta as a gaming event for Open Source Summit. Another question, he reassured everybody that Fedora will also remain unaffected by the IBM purchase. Now, that's something that I was particularly questioning after their decision to remove the plugin for Snapd inside of the Software Center. It seemed like a strange decision for Fedora to move, and interestingly enough, the person that was in charge of Snapd on Fedora wasn't consulted. And so I kind of wondered if there was a connection there to IBM. Looks like it was just a coincidence. There was a former IBM employee that was asking whether there would be discouragement from helping other projects not related to open sources. Apparently they felt that was an issue in the past. And Chris responded that employees are free to contribute to any other project in their free time, as has always been the case for Red Hat. They asked about ZFS coming into Red Hat, to which Chris responded that there were a number of licensing concerns, but at the end of the day, at least it was better than ButterUp. No, he didn't say that. I'm just kidding. Concerns and needed to be fixed in upstream Linux first. Finally, one of the questions that were discussed was bringing ClearOS optimizations to RHEL, and Chris responded that they closely work with Intel already on optimizations, and they'll continue to do so. There was a great deal of questions that we obviously don't have time to cover on the show, but we'll have a link for you in the show notes over to the AMA, so you can go check it out and read it. A huge thanks to Chris. Again, shameless self-plug. We've had Chris Wright on the Ask Noah show. He's a great guy to chat with, very technically intellectual, a great leader, and it's awesome to see him digging down into the community and participating in a way that people are really going to appreciate, and people really feel like they're connected to this $34 billion company, and they actually value input directly from people that may not make them a dime. And that is an awesome thing that I think Red Hat continues to do really, really well, and Chris Wright continues to do really well, and we're certainly appreciative to see that.
Yeah, this to me was such an important thing to do. I mean, Red Hat is, I think, one of the top 10 most popular sites in the world. So it's a very popular place, especially among young crowds, for people to hang out and talk about various issues. The Ask Me Anything segments are extremely popular. Usually you have different celebrities and big names out there dropping a movie. But seeing Red Hat out there, to me, just made me smile. And seeing his responses, which weren't just corporate doublespeak in there, right? It wasn't just a bunch of buzzword bingo stuff. He was really answering the questions, in my opinion, with a lot of depth inside each one when individuals were asking, such as, the gaming thing. I thought, well, this is kind of an easy one you could just avoid, but he provided information I didn't know that Red Hat went out there and sponsored game summits and different things out there to push it, because obviously gaming has an impact on, like we were talking about before with the VR stuff, outside of just gaming. It impacts all kinds of different industries, some of the innovations and things that come from it. Now, they're not directly going to probably create a Red Hat gaming distro, but that doesn't mean they're not going to support it. Because
the important thing is he didn't say they're not going to create a Red Hat gaming distro.
Yeah.
I think we need to be very careful about his words. Yeah.
So I thought this was awesome. And honestly, in my opinion, I think the company that does community outreach the best has always been Canonical, and I'm really happy to see somebody else coming out there and doing more of this outreach.
You can see just the disappointment in Noah's face.
I mean, I'm just being honest. When you look at the Snap side of it, the hosting YouTube live events,
if you look at
people together, I know I think Red Hat does more sponsorships of events, but not everybody in the community goes to events, whereas Canonical's more out there on the web, reaching people in the past. At least that was my view.
Well,
but I think Red Hat's picking that up, and
yes, I agree. I think that Red Hat is one of those companies that is like, they do outreach, but they're not really proactive in the sense. Like, if you look at the way Canonical does it, I agree that Canonical does it more in the sense that they have people who are actively involved in other communities, that are actively involved in the Linux community. They show up on YouTube channels that, will
show up in our Telegram all the time.
Right.
I can't tell you the last time a Red Hat employee showed up in our, or of a major position showed up in our Telegram randomly. And
any position, because a lot of times they don't even tell you that they work there. Like, there's a time I've actually had a conversation where I was talking to a guy who worked at Red Hat, and I didn't know he worked at Red Hat until about an hour into the conversation. He's like, "Oh yeah, by the way, I work at Red Hat." I was like, you should probably mention that just a little sooner. And it's just that the Snapd development summits, they have, like, they bring in for various different, like the Godot engine didn't have a Snap thing. They had no interest in doing that until Canonical was like, "Hey, would you like to come to our event and our summit? We'll pay you for your trip together and we're working." And like, there's a lot more outreach in that sense from the Canonical side, and they focus on a lot more of, like, they do like UbiCon and all that, UbuCon or whatever, and they do that all the time. And they're involved in most of the different European conferences and stuff, and they have some representatives going to all different types of conferences and all that. They have a lot more outreach. I think that Red Hat has been doing it a lot better recently. But I think they were more of like, they were seeming more like the corporate approach of like, hey, we're going to put our name on this and say, hey, we are supporting this thing, and therefore that's our thing. And that's where they stop. And I think that because Canonical has the direct involvement and direct engagement in a variety of different ways, I would agree that they also do it more. But Red Hat has seemingly done it a lot recently, and this is a great example of a higher level, because I don't think... Actually, Mark Shuttleworth probably has. I think he might have done one. I don't know, but there's a lot of potential for them to start doing it this way, and I like the fact that they went into a community that isn't really focused on the enterprise server level. They're like, hey, we just want to talk about Linux and like have conversations with people from companies like that. And I think that's awesome.
I think we're calling out Chris to show up into our Telegram group, and if he does, we'll shout out Red Hat 7 times on our next podcast.
I like that. I like that.
Yeah. We'll also denounce ButterFS as the official file system for Destination Linux, and we'll let it out.
No, we will not do that. ButterFS,
that's going to happen.
Your tribalism showing.
Right. So Counter-Strike is one of those games that's been around for a very long time and is super popular, and it's like Valve's probably their flagship game, and it's not got a lot of love in a little while. But they've recently got some with back in 2012, the game of was CS:GO was released, and they did add the what was it called? What's
Battle Arena Field? Yes. But I can't remember what its name. But it's like the Fortnite.
Yeah, it's Battle Royale, but I forgot what they called it. So they did that, but they've actually added, like, there's a lot of times that people were like, "That's great, you added these things, but we want some more, DLC stuff, new maps and that kind of thing, because we want to just expand the game itself rather than adding additional modes in what we already have." And Valve has listened, and they have added new maps to make the way into the game. There's also a new game mode coming called Scrimmage, and Scrimmage Mode allows players to test their skill like a 5v5 competitive mode, but without the official ranking being impacted, which is awesome because when I try to play with like in the competitive aspect of when I played Counter-Strike, I am terrible at that game. So when I try to play with people who are friends of mine, they are way better than me, and they put me in a position where they don't want to play with me because it ruins their rank. And it's like this weird, like...
Well, they must have that same mode in Rocket League, because you're ranked really high in Rocket League, but you would still come down to the pleb level with me and play as long as it was unranked, right? And
no, I'd play with, and there's some ranks I'd play with as well. Like there's a hoops mode. I'll play ranked in that.
Because if you played with me in a ranked mode in Rocket League, you'd go from like platinum to lead.
Well,
like, immediately.
But well, champion, but yeah.
So CS:GO, one of the best games out there. It shocks me to this day when I do benchmarks, when I got the new system, and the prior system when I got the 2700X. Game people want to see CS:GO. Where's the CS:GO frame rates? How's CS:GO play? I'm like, it's amazing. This game, after so many years, is such a flagship to people for first-person shooters, and I think a lot of that is because Valve has heavy amount of competitive game events going on. So this is one of those games that if you become good at, you can make like a good living winning tournaments and teams and things with CS:GO. A lot of tournaments out there, a lot of skill required, probably one of the best known first-person shooters where precision and skill truly matters. You're not going to walk into CS:GO and guns blazing and kill anything. You'll die in like the second you boot in if you just run in there. Like you need a lot of strategy, a lot of skill in there to really be successful. Quite an amazing game that they have, where I think if they came out with a new Counter-Strike that didn't basically just be a graphical update, people would riot and just keep playing CS:GO because it's so well balanced and good as it is now.
Yeah, it's a fantastic game, and I really like the fact that they made it easier to play competitive with, like, a competitive style without having to worry about the competitive ranking of it. Because like it makes it possible to play with more people and not have to worry about because if you wanted to play the casual, like you couldn't do the team versus team thing. You'd just be thrown into some random server and stuff, which is fun too. You know, for the first 20 seconds before you just get destroyed over and over and over. Yeah. Well, for me anyway. But
so for those who want to play the mode, Dark One in our Patreon chat, it said it was Danger Zone is what it's called, which is a really cool battle royale mode if you want to have some fun in Counter-Strike.
And a lot. It's and also it's battle royale, but it's also like a very specific way they do it. So it's like it's not just like a copy of like PUBG or whatever. It is very cool in how they do like the way that like things, like not all the guns are available at a certain time. Ammunition, you also have to find different like levels of the part of the game. And also, because I assume that since Noah was bothered by the tribalism thing, I would also assume that he'd be bothered by the danger zone. Because I just had to.
Right on the tails of a new Top Gun coming out. So Valve is in the news again for another major contribution here. So we've covered them heavily over the last few weeks, and that's not on purpose. They just keep doing awesome things. So what are we supposed to do? So this week, Valve is back in the news for proposing new changes to their kernel that will help make gaming even better. So now they're getting directly into the kernel. And I did create a little bit of history here because I know not everybody's interested in gaming, but I put together a little timeline of what Valve has done with Linux, just some of the major ones, not the small stuff. We had Gabe Newell, the owner of Valve, saying Linux is the future of gaming. This was before they officially backed, as I understand, the Linux desktop for Steam. So, and apparently during the Windows 8 fiasco, Gabe, again, at this point we had Steam on Linux, but doubled down on the statement that Linux is the future for gaming. They released the Steam machines that were Linux gaming consoles, which did... You got me, Noah. Consoles, which did not take off, but they didn't take off initially, but they were something that people were very excited about to get into their living rooms, at least enthusiasts, but it was probably the wrong time in the market for the vast majority because you also had major consoles out there coming out like PS4 and the new Xbox, I think around that time, if I'm not mistaken. So it kind of got overshadowed. They released their very own Steam OS based on Linux. They work with Wine to bring us Steam Play, which has allowed us to run thousands of games now natively with Windows. They're backing VR for Linux desktops, and now they are working directly in the kernel to help out there as well for improvement. So that is why when we talk about gaming stuff impacting other areas, this is an example of how that's so, because even if you're not a gamer and don't plan on touching gaming, the patches that they're wanting to put into the kernel will help you with any other graphical implementation as well for improvement of your machine. Basically, what they're doing is they've put the fsync patch set into production, which would allow them to execute on this module once it gets loaded into the kernel side so they can take advantage of it. But basically, what they're doing in here is finding ways that they can help multi-threaded applications push the CPU to its full potential so that it's not governed as heavily as it is in base in the kernel today. So to me, again, another fantastic thing that Valve is giving back to the Linux community. And I wanted to take the time to talk about and really take a tally of all the things that Valve has done for Linux since they've been in the news a lot, because this is all helping Linux push forward as a desktop.
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those things that it's like, what else could they do to prove that they care about the platform? Hey, let's work directly with the kernel that the platform's built on. Like, that would do it. I think that would do it.
Exactly. So it's funny. I was in a standoff in my trip to Florida. I'm in the elevator and I have my Linux washes Windows shirt on that I have.
Nice.
And in the elevator, I look over because I feel somebody staring at me. And the person, I look over and I see their shirt immediately, and it has the Microsoft logo on it. And he's just staring me down. And I said, "Hey, you work for Microsoft?" And he goes, "Yeah."
And we like Linux.
He goes, "I like your shirt." And I said, "Yeah, because Microsoft loves Linux, right?" And he goes, "Yeah, for our stock prices, we really love it." And I thought that was hilarious because, of course, their Azure platform and everything, they're making tons of money on it. So in any case, I don't know if Microsoft loves Linux, but I can certainly say Valve does.
I think that guy is just saying what Microsoft really believes, but it doesn't have the intestinal fortitude to say. But that's pretty much what it is. But yeah, Valve actually does care, and they've proven it on so many different examples. If they did literally nothing else except bring Steam to Linux, I would be happy. Like, that itself is awesome. And then if they do have Proton and stop there, it's awesome. They're doing so much. But they don't stop there. They continuously build things to benefit the ecosystem. And, it's hard to not like Valve. Even if Valve does something that you might not like at some point, they've done so many things now that they've built a mountain of gratitude that even if they make a mistake, I'm still like, whatever.
Yeah, and I forgot even in here recently the AMD and Intel GPU shader improvements that they put in. So, I mean, there's so much more that's not even covered here, but just to show you why it's important.
Exactly.
Our software spotlight this week couldn't have come at a better time, and it is Project Pinta. It's a simple and free open source drawing image editing program. Now, we talk a lot about image editing tools, but sometimes you don't want to become an artist. You just want a simple interface with a few bells and whistles to get some quick edits done. And that's exactly what Project Pinta is. Now, it's interesting. Like I said, the timing of this is interesting because it was my daughter's birthday on Wednesday. She's 5 years old. And I reached out to one of the open source graphic designers in the community, Mr. Albert Westra, and I said, "Hey, I've got my daughter. She's really interested in drawing. The problem is she goes into our sunroom and she fills the entire walls up with drawings. What can we do about that?" And his answer was, "Yeah, you should get her a Wacom tablet and have her draw." And so what was interesting was I had installed my paint for her to use, but I also have Project Pinta. And so I've actually I shouldn't say I have any real experience, but she has some experience playing with it. And so it's a pretty cool piece of software, and definitely something to check out if you're interested in getting in touch with your artistic side.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, I think Pinta is quite good. It's great for like just getting the basic things done, and it also is great for like beginning like doing image editing or like the basics of image editing and doing like getting used to doing drawing on digital form. Like it's great for that, and I think it's a really good tip, and I think that it has a lot of potential that people should check it out if you're interested in that kind of thing, because GIMP can do a lot of things, but you might not need that much power, that much features if you just want to do like some basic editing and stuff, and Pinta does it very well. I don't know if it's Pinta or Pinta, whatever. But also there's some we have all used like tails to do things and to watch like logs, and the tips and trick this week is Multitail, which allows you to monitor log files and command output using multiple windows in a terminal, colorize, filter, merge, and all in one tool. So it can even monitor wildcards. If another file is matching the wildcard, it has the most recent modification date, it will automatically switch to that file. And this is useful for real-time monitoring logs and changes, such as checking on authorization logs and sys logs and all kinds of sorts of things. So if you need to monitor your logs, Multitail is definitely something worth checking out.
So a big thank you to each and every one of you for supporting us by watching or listening, however you do it, to Destination Linux. We love our patrons and coffee supporters. We've picked on Noah enough. Just want to give a special shout out for your support. We do a live show for our patrons, so come join us. If you want to be a part of the show, you can join for just $1, and that's darn near free.
That's right. We're now on Coffee as a way to support the show. Coffee offers a nice monthly option that will allow you to have the same perks as Patreon. There'll be a link in the show notes to our website to join Coffee. The perks include things like access to live shows, as well as unedited version of the videos, as well as our most sincere gratitude.
Please get back with us and let us know what you think, or ask any burning questions via numerous methods that Michael has set up out there. We have comments at destinationlinux.org, a Telegram group, which is absolutely fantastic and growing. We're about to cross over the 800 individual mark.
Pretty close.
But we really need to get over that 1,000 mark. So definitely go join the Telegram group and see how many awesome people are in the community that can help you with issues or just discuss topics of interest. We have Discord, Twitter, Mastodon, pretty much everything you could think under the sun. If you want more information on that, go to destinationlinux.org/contact, and please keep your comments and questions coming. We absolutely love to hear them and hear of ways that we can improve the show, or of your ideas in general comments. And we read all of them, even if we can't reply to every single one. We literally do read every single one of them. And sometimes we even get to include them in the show.
Yep. And also, the show doesn't stop here. There's a lot more fun you can get on our own channels, where you can go to Ryan's channel at youtube.com/DasGeek, where he'll fill your brains on hardware, software, and all things Linux. You can check out Zeb. He wasn't here this week, but he's still making content at the youtube.com/ZebedeeBoss. Zeb can be found driving crazy speeds, moving aside caravans to get in his way on his live streams. You can check out my content at touchdigital.com, where I do in-depth weekly Linux news podcasts called This Week in Linux, and other Linux-related content. You can check out Noah at AskNoahShow.com, where he's a weekly talk radio show on Tuesdays at 6 p.m. Central. You can join him and ask him questions about Linux, tech, business, what his favorite type of cup of coffee is.
Yeah, well, Noah's not a huge draw, but get this. If you join Noah's show, I show up to his IRC chat, and you could hang out with me during Noah's show.
That's true, too. Dosky could be there talking about coffee.
How many nights did it take you to come up with coffee?
Oh, I didn't. I was actually one of the patrons gave it to me in a Telegram message. Like, hey, you should mess with Noah with this one. I was like, yep,
hey,
sure will.
Can we kick that guy out?
Band hammer's coming.
Anyway, you can also like that smash button and share the show on social media.
Everybody have a great week, and remember, the journey itself is just as important as the destination. We'll see you next week.
Yep. Thanks, everyone.
We love ButterFS.